Heed, plain, boys. If the intruder continues to approach the post or the forbidden border, the sentry fires a warning shot into the air. If the intruder fails to comply with this requirement and attempts to enter the post, cross the forbidden border, or flees after such an attempt, the sentry fires his weapon at him. Garrison and guard service regulations. Despite all the secrecy, everyone found out that we were going to the surface. The mathematician was terribly pouty. Vladimir Pavlovich was unperturbed, and I could barely contain my joy. And with my mind, I understood that this was some boy who had not finished playing with his toys, jumping and having fun inside me, and that my other self, a grown and well-fed man, was looking at this boy indulgently, also secretly rejoicing, because finally, at least some event would happen in the life of an adult. It was necessary to walk about 200 meters from our place of residence to the sought-after side fork. But all our friends seemed to have gathered at the edge of the platform by chance. Even Granny Toma came, looked at us and wiped away a tear. She looked again, looked away, and said mournfully, "Goodbye, boys. Try to go back." We were walking along the tunnel, and seizing the moment, I asked Vladimir Pavlovich why he had agreed to go on the road. He looked me in the face calmly. "Well, there was no choice, and I want to live." "In what sense?" I didn't understand. "So if we hadn't agreed, we'd be dead." And he whistled softly. "Oh, come on. Where did you get that from?" You see, our new boss immediately revealed all his trump cards. That is, he wasn't worried about any external or internal secrecy. He knew that nothing would come out, and I was watching his assistant Mirzo closely. When we agreed, he seemed to let up. He even took the gun off his knees. Although I think they would have taken us out quietly. Have you seen how Mirzo watches us? It's important to them that we don't run away ourselves. And it's clear that if something happens, if we're not needed, they'll take us out like a pebble from a rail, with one click. Yes, I got you involved. Don't worry. I wanted to do it myself. I've been sitting here too long. I've lost interest in life. And we'll see who wins up there. So what if they kill us anyway? Ah, my friend, Sashenka. Remember we argued about the wars in the Central Metro and what I told you? You said a lot of things. And I told you. They knew what they were dying for. And you don't know why you live. And here, too, there's no point in living like a vegetable. The Metro is the cradle of the new humanity. But it can't live in the cradle forever. You should know this from your books. To my shame, I didn't remember where it was from. It was obviously some kind of quote. But I heard the ringing again, but I didn't remember where it was from. Some kind of slogan, pioneers, pioneer palaces, cradle. No, I didn't remember, and that's okay. True, I deeply remembered something else. How we argued about the future of the underground inhabitants, precisely in those days when news of the wars inside the Circle Line reached us with some delay. Vladimir Pavlovich said this. You see, here's the thing. A new generation is growing up. Right after the cataclysm, of course, no one had children, and then people settled in and off we went. Of course, there aren't many children. Not every station can raise them. But understand, a generation is growing up that has never seen the sky. Children have become resistant to the diseases that we died from. They are different. They have two paths, either to become young wolves who will drink blood in the dungeons, or to become people who will come out into the light. The only thing we can give them is a dream of the sky, so that they have somewhere to go. Ah, Sasha, it is very important to give a dream. You can pay a lot for it. You can pay for everything. But where can we go? Further degenerate into senseless Morlocks, gradually die in our holes. This is no good. Yes, and I know who the Morlocks are, if that matters. The only place it makes sense to run is to the surface. I don't think you can live in the city, but there must still be life outside the city. But is it possible to get to it, to this oasis? I have no idea. What keeps you here? Nothing keeps you here. But I was lying. Something was holding me back. No, not satiety or safety, but something else. It happened not so long ago. I went to Dynamo by chance. We were transporting a load of pigskin there on a hand car. They were sewing at Dynamo. They were sewing a lot and quickly, in my opinion, comical things. But they were in great demand at many stations. There at the reception, I saw Katerina. She was a creature from another world. To me, she seemed completely amazing. There was none of the frailty typical of many girls in the dungeons. A tough girl, I thought then. However, later I found out that we were almost the same age. We exchanged only a few words then, and a few days later, when I came again with a load, the same thing. But then a couple of words turned into 10, then into 100. She had one oddity. She was friends with a rat. The rat was remarkable, lived in an unknown place, and came when called. It was a tame rat with a pink ribbon on its neck. Rats were not very popular in the subway, especially such big ones, apparently mutated. But you have to give credit to these creatures. If you befriend a rat, it becomes additional eyes and ears, and these were very sensitive eyes and ears. I visited Dynamo more and more often, and our romance developed slowly, like in old jokes. The rat looked at me attentively and appraisingly, it seems, appraisingly. She made a decision for a long time, and then finally found me suitable for the role of her mistress's friend. Sometimes the rat even left us alone, as if telling me before leaving, "Look, don't offend her. I trust you. For now I trust you." And imagine that you live not in prison, but in a monastery. This is very important. Vladimir Pavlovich continued. What do you mean? Is it better? Yes, you keep saying better, worse. In our world there are no better and worse. It's just that when a person is in prison, he thinks that he will be released. That is, the majority of people, those who are in prison, think that real life will begin there, in freedom. They count the days until their release, figure out how and what will happen then. Well, some were in prison for life. Some, yes, and that's the whole point. We are all in prison for life, and realizing this, many people back then, long ago, committed suicide. I understand them, in part. But imagine that a person went to a monastery, and it is forever, and you understand that life is glimmering here, and you devote yourself to the circumstances of this life. It's just a state, not a delay until some better time, when you'll be released. If you want, go out. There are quite a few ways to the surface. You can go up dozens of ways. But what's the point? Why? What to do there? What to eat? What to drink? Information about the fauna is generally extremely contradictory. Delta mutations alone are worth something. I probably knew about delta mutations. This was a kind of mutants that gave a stable picture already in the second generation. For example, lizards instantly grew wings, and they turned into something dragon-like. Of course, no one studied this. Dragons and pterodactyls, of course, were seen, but only high-browed Goodwins from the Emerald City could consider them an object of science. And even then, it's unclear whether these Goodwins existed. Here, too, along with the Baumanites, is one of the urban legends, akin to pterodactyls that degenerated from pigeons. But pterodactyls were definitely there, and the Goodwins were just legends. And delta mutations were also at hand, Those pigs that grew in the underground hangars at the airport, weren't they an example? We knew that they mutated. Who didn't? The pigs were really unusual, rapidly multiplying, gigantic, just walking sausage. I don't even know what was more profitable, our hydroponic crops and miracle grains, or these pigs. True, there were legends about these pigs, too. We were afraid of the pig farmers because they were kind of not of this world. It seems that pigs were closer to them than people. One day, someone from the Hanseatic League made an order for a live pig. The management consulted and decided to sell. I came to the pig farmers and stayed late. So they called me to help, as if they were doing me a favor, and then we loaded the pig onto the cart together. The pig farmers suddenly started crying, saying goodbye to the animal. Then it seemed to me that they were talking to the pig. Well, yes, it's none of my business. They said about pig farmers that many of them are not buried, but asked to be put into a bioreactor after death, so that they can be used as food for their charges. And so the first day of going to the surface arrived. I understood that even if everything went well, we would not fly away right away, but would have to prepare for the flight for a long time. With visible displeasure, the mathematician let me go get my things. I didn't really need the down jacket, but I almost threw a tantrum, insisting that I had to take it with me to the surface. It was completely unclear what the weather would be like up there now. September could be cold, or it could be warm, like before. Climate is an unpredictable thing, and we were constantly being scared either by a nuclear winter or the scorching heat of global warming accelerated by the cataclysm. I went to Katya, who guessed everything. I had nothing to lose, except her, of course, and I told her all the details. She fell silent for a long time, just like on that day when we wandered around the still-sleeping dynamo station and looked for traces of ancient creatures on the columns. In the dim light of the signal lamps, our faces were the color of the walls of grayish-red Tagil marble. We poked our fingers at the pylons, where we could find fossilized colonies of corals, invertebrates unknown to me, that remained there like curls. "Look, this is a murex, a purple snail," I said, and our fingers, intertwined, slid along the marble. Long ago they ground it and got the dye purple, which was used to paint the cloaks of Greek archons and the togas of emperors. Homer wrote about it. At these words I got confused and continued, remembering that the snout was written in some book. But in general they also ate it. Our love was like this snail, tightly walled up underground. Katya understood me at once, and in the short moment when I heard her sigh, she imagined our whole life after my disappearance. I understand. It has to be that way. If it has to be that way, I'll be back. She kept silent because she should have said, "I'll be waiting," or said, "I believe you'll be back." But it was stupid to say that. I didn't really believe I'd be back. Or even worse, I didn't believe I could be back. A porcelain soccer player was looking at us from a round window above, his foot raised to kick. His ball had long since flown away, and the soccer player was looking at the toe of his boot in bewilderment. It was another pylon, and it was far away in every sense from the one from which the porcelain figure skater was looking at us. And I returned to our campsite. Is there life beyond the Mcad? Regarding clothing, George said that it would be enough to take 2 white flannel tracksuits, and when they got dirty, we'd wash them ourselves in the river. We asked him if he had tried washing white flannel in the river, and he answered, "As a matter of fact, no, but I have friends who have tried and found it quite easy." Jerome K. Jerome, 3 men in a boat, not counting the dog. We had been preparing for this exit to the surface for a long time. The mathematician had been comparing some drawings with real doors in the side galleries of the dynamo station all day. Some of these doors were tightly welded shut, and some were locked with keys that had been lost forever. The mathematician, using a special pencil to illuminate the doors, compared the door numbers and their designations on his plan. Finally, grabbing several of his mysterious boxes, respirators, and glasses, we set off. Despite all our tricks, we meandered for a long time, and finally emerged 100 meters from the station, right in the middle of Leningradsky Prospect. In that time, we could have probably reached Beloruskaya. As soon as Mirzo pushed the lid of the sewer collector aside, we lowered our sunglasses. Although the sun was setting, our eyes still needed to get used to the light. The avenue turned out to be empty. The wind was driving either leaves or grass along it. I decided so, because human garbage should have been carried away from here 20 years ago, and by another wind. The mathematician checked the area with a radiometer and gave us a sign that yes, we could. We got out and started looking around. Indeed, it was like first sex. This is probably how people felt when they stepped on the moon. First sex on the moon, as my friend, the Wigger pig farm foreman Roman, would have said, and he would have certainly laughed indecently. But what is true is true. Blood was pounding in my temples, a bell was ringing in my ears, and my heart was jumping out of my chest. It was deserted all around. The avenue turned out to be surprisingly wide, and there were no cars on it. Even the overpass hadn't collapsed. No, some blocks had fallen from it, but otherwise the transport interchange to the third ring looked just like in the photographs. The mathematician gathered us in a sports store on the corner and read a short introduction. The object is located at the plant, which is located behind these houses. 5 years ago, we tried to break through here, even brought in fuel. Of course, in 5 years it could have spoiled, but I think it will do. At least we have hope. And you, Alexander, turn your head like in an air battle. It will come in handy. This is a restless place. We went out into the street, where tram tracks were visible among the brush of grass. And indeed they tried to break through here. Not far away stood an armored personnel carrier, which, as it was obvious, had arrived here quite recently. Its crew was also clearly visible. A headless skeleton was sticking out of the upper hatch. Someone had bitten off his head and shoulders. Everything else was present below. Even a torn hose from a gas mask, which went somewhere into rags. Oh, that's Cuckoos. He was a cheerful guy, a specialist in visual propaganda, only he was always very impetuous, Vladimir Pavlovich exclaimed. The second corpse was lying near the wheels, completely intact, and inside the armored vehicle I saw when I was crawling for the fuel canisters. There were 2 more inside, but without visible damage. At least they were in protective suits without visible holes. Having taken the fuel, we walked past a peeling house. All the facing tiles had fallen to the ground. The walls had become gray and porous, as if the building had been molded from some dark sand. I really wanted to climb inside just like that, to see how people used to live. Finally, we found ourselves in front of the factory entrance. The once glass pavilion had lost its walls, and now the turnstiles at the entrance were covered in garbage and dust. The turnstiles looked like huge metal cabinets, taller than a person. In some of them, the relays worked, and they grabbed the emptiness from both sides with metal claws, just like the old turnstiles in the subway used to do. Now they seemed dead and not scary. But you never know what seems here. And when we squeezed past these monsters, and I found myself in a space where you had to press codes, and apparently receive and hand over your pass to the machine in the slot, I still shuddered. What if electricity appeared inside them from God knows where? The levers would click and I would be locked inside this machine, locked forever. But nothing like that happened. We walked along a wide asphalt road between the workshops. A forklift stood across it, behind the levers of which sat a cheerful skeleton in a plastic helmet, a ready-made advertisement for safety precautions. If anything, his skull remained completely intact, and his teeth were simply ideal, even neat. I could not boast of such. The mathematician pulled his monstrous ledger out of his backpack and, consulting it, pointed the way to the right workshop. There were aluminum shutters at the end of the workshop. As soon as we tried to open them, they crashed down at our feet. There really was a small plane in front of us. We looked at it in delight for a few seconds before Vladimir Pavlovich asked a general question. "Hey, bosses, where are the wings?" There were no wings. The plane froze in a narrow hangar without wings. It seems that I was the only one who was not scared. Judging by his appearance, the mathematician broke out in a cold sweat. He was scared for the first time in my presence, silently, but terribly. I stood nearby and saw how large drops appeared on his forehead. But the Tajik immediately ran to the shelves, disappeared behind them, and from there his scream was heard in an amazing and incomprehensible language. It's a pity I don't know him. The wings were found. It was just a matter of hanging them on the plane again. Here I also had some doubts about whether we had enough qualifications. But we had enough qualifications. In 3 days, we assembled the plane like a constructor. I tested the engine. This was probably another scary moment, but the engine started as if so many years had not passed. The mathematician finally screwed a surveillance camera onto the belly of the plane. His plan seemed quite clear. We were reconnoitering the route and trying to establish contact. The camera only reinforced the importance of my mission. Others would follow us along the route I had laid out. At that moment, I seemed to myself like Columbus, who saw that a logbook, a gift from the Queen, bound in leather with bronze clasps, had been brought to him on the caravel. Yes, I knew that Columbus was not sailing on a caravel, and I had also imagined the logbook. But that was exactly how I felt. That night I had a dream about getting ready for war. What kind of war, with whom, was completely incomprehensible to me. My father said that if I went there, I would return in 20 years a beggar and without companions. Then, trembling with fear, right in that dream, I pretended to be crazy. Right at the edge of the airfield, out of nowhere, stood a cultivator, and I started it and began to loosen the runway. It was strange that no one came running to the sound. Having plowed a huge strip, I began to sow some seeds. I had already sown half of the runway when I finally looked closely at what was in my palm. And there was salt. I rubbed it between my fingers and looked around helplessly. My father was still nearby and said that there was no need to grimace. He was humming an old song about gypsies who have no trace in their hearts, and, to look at it, no hearts. Only then my father patted me on the shoulder and added that you can't trust gypsies. They predict everything correctly, but it will not do any good, because predictions and hints ruin life just like the desire to be first. Don't try to be first in everything. It's a waste of time. You'll be the first in a strange place and you won't come back at all. Travel is like that. You'll be the first and you can be the last. Be in your place. And if you come out in the first hours, you'll disappear." Katya and I met like thieves plotting evil. Her enclosure was empty and quiet. The rat had gone somewhere, disappeared, gone. Out of delicacy, I thought. We pressed ourselves against each other and stood motionless, listening to each other, to our breathing and the movement of our fingers on the skin. Our fingers interlocked by themselves, and I hugged her tightly. "Have you noticed," I said in her ear, "that when you try to emphasize certain words, it only comes out worse? If you say, 'I love you,' it will come out right. But if you say, 'I love you very much,' it will come out much weaker." She began to breathe rapidly in my arms, as if she was trying to break free and fly away. "You're mine, no matter what happens next," I said, and held Katya tightly to me, and felt her breasts tighten and round under my palms. "Everything I have," she replied. "Not only, touch them." "No, don't. They're always at hand," she said and giggled. "Stroke them instead. That's it. Good. Please, Sasha, love me. Where you'll be. Understand that our lives are short, and as soon as you understand another person, they're no longer around. All that's left is to believe that they're somewhere there remembering you." I closed my eyes and felt her light body on me, and that there were fewer barriers between us. Eyes were really not needed, because the emergency lights went out, and the light from the guard rooms didn't reach here. We stood pressed against each other, not moving, listening to each other, to our breathing and the movement of our fingers on the skin. She moved her hand down, first hesitantly, then more boldly, and the world was transformed. Everything became completely different. Objects changed their properties. Her body was surprisingly elastic, so much so that it seemed unnatural. The smells became different, the cold became warm, and the soft became hard. I again felt how her breasts pressed against my chest, and her lips against my lips. She hung on me, and I felt the unusual weight of her body on me. "Really, now you can't tell which of us is which. So one Satan, huh?" she asked. "Yes. Tell me, have you thought of this for a long time?" "I don't know. Well, a long time ago." I kissed her so hard that our teeth bumped. I hugged Katya tighter and tighter, and thought to myself that here I can't say, "See you tomorrow." Once again, tomorrow because we don't have any tomorrow. Everything can only be here and now, and I don't want to say goodbye. "Do you want me to call you Catherine, like in the old novels?" In the old novels, the hero always said goodbye before the journey and promised to bring something. A scarlet flower, for example. A scarlet flower is already incest. You are not my dad, after all. She smiled in the darkness, but I, even though I could not see anything, knew that she was smiling, fortunately. "Don't blab." And I thought, I will say goodbye, and no one will hear me, because I do not believe that we have tomorrow. And we began to move again, like the silver train, a night ghost train that goes without lights, which no one sees. Not the one with an electric engine, but the one with a puffing locomotive, and such long steel things moving rapidly that they rustle back and forth, every now and then entering the cylinders. Fresh steam was changing to mashed steam. The connecting rod and piston were moving back and forth. The valve was working. But there was no meaning behind these words. Nothing existed at all except us. Neither the subway with its motley people, nor the mysterious scorched earth above, nor the rest of the world, in which you can't tell if there are people. No, perhaps there was no one anywhere except the two of us next to the dynamo station pylon. There was absolute silence, but it seemed to me that the sounds of our breathing filled the entire station, rushing through the tunnels and bending under their influence the hermetic gates several kilometers away from here. The darkness was pulsating, and I wanted it to go on forever. But at that moment, it was all over. We stood leaning against the station pylon, feeling ourselves becoming soft and sluggish Morlocks again. Only the 1948 world figure skating champion, Maria Isakova, with her leg raised and arms outstretched, looked at us from a porcelain medallion. But only high up at the royal gates, Katya whispered. A child privy to the mysteries was crying that no one would come back. I knew that this was some kind of prayer from the old days, before the cataclysm. I had heard it somewhere, but I didn't want to think about anything. Now we had to figure out where to take off. We needed about 200 meters, but it had to be a full 200 meters. For the space inside the plant, this was too much. We couldn't move the forklift, and we had to push the plane out into the street. Fortunately, it turned out that the gates had long since fallen. But the propeller spinner was now pointing in the direction of our target, almost exactly northeast. I began to pray, not out loud, but to myself, as if I were talking to a creature unknown to me, who watches over us all and determines the life of each of us, from the best, like Katya and my father, to the pig farmers, whom I hated. But now, already in the cockpit, preparing to leave them I almost loved, I asked this great creature for luck, a little luck in my search, in our great desperate journey. The engine began to tremble, the propeller turned into a shining circle. We pulled the glasses down over our eyes, and I began to gradually increase the gas.